Welcome back to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle King. I'm here with my co-host, Dan Freeman. And look, we have somebody on here today that I feel like is like a celebrity. I call him the godfather of philanthropy and fundraising. But he's a transformational nonprofit leader with over 40 years of experience guiding organizations through growth, guiding organizations through change, guiding organizations through long-term impact across senior living, across healthcare and education. Mark has led fundraising and operational efforts, including significant revenue growth, multi-million dollar budget leadership, and board partnership at a very, very high level. He currently serves as a VP of philanthropy, major gifts, and planned giving. He's a beast, and I am just so grateful to know this man. Mark, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing great, Kyle. How are you doing?
I'm exceptional. I'm exceptional. I've had better days. These allergies are winning in this season. I don't know why, but I feel really good. And beyond a lot of the titles, you're an author, you're doing a lot of things, you have your hands in a lot of things, Mark. What's the story? Like, what is the story that even got you to all of this work in fundraising and philanthropy?
So, this will sound either trite or cliche, but it really all started with my mother. I was at an AFP leadership conference back in 1987, and one of the questions in the group that you had to answer was who instilled your sense of philanthropy in you. And we were out in San Francisco at Berkeley, and it was 7 o'clock at night, and we had all had a long day and everything. And I started thinking about this, and it was like, it was my mom. She would take me when we were kids to the church, which was 3 blocks away, and help out with everything. Whether it was a festival selling raffle tickets or whether it was packing, boxes of clothing for the poor that was being donated, all those kinds of things. And so she, had a combination of volunteerism and giving of what little resources we had, because I grew up in the inner city in Detroit, and really instilled in me the fact that, it's our responsibility to help take care of those that don't have or those that are in need, and whatever the mission is within that. And so did I plan on being a fundraiser? Never. My degree's in theology. I started out as a religion teacher at my alma mater, which was an all boys boarding school. And from there, I decided, well, I'm going to become a private school administrator. So if I'm going to do that, I should learn all the aspects of being in a private school as an administrator. And so I did teaching, department head, athletic director, dean of student activities. And then I said, well, I need to get, some work as like a director of admissions, a development position, all those other kinds of things that seemed important back then. And not that they're not important today. Don't get me wrong, anybody in private schools, all those jobs are still important. But I went over to Friends School in Detroit. So it was a whole new experience. I left the Catholic all boys boarding school to go and work with the Quakers. And when I got there, I was there for about a month in the job. And the head of the school came to me and said, we just fired the development director. Would you like to do that job too? That job too. I said, that it wasn't one or the other. And he said, no. He said, we can't afford that. He says, and there's another catch to it. I said, oh, you're going to pay me a little bit more money. He goes, no, we can't do that either. Wow. And I said, well, what's the catch? He says, we're $300,000 in debt, and the money that you're going to raise is going to pay teachers' salaries every 2 weeks.
That sounds about right.
Wow. So that was my very first development job. And, from there, I really actually, as much stress and pressure as it was, fell in love with the fact of working with people to try to meet the needs. The school itself was started in the early 60s during the civil rights issues in Detroit and around the country. Mm-hmm. And so we had the who's who, of Detroit's, finest and wealthiest and most affluent, and the corporate leaders who helped put the school together. And then they went away.
Wow.
and they were no longer supporting it. So we either had to rekindle relationships or make new relationships. And I just got jazzed about being able to, talk with people and see what their passions and dreams were and how do we, put that together with the mission. And when I first started doing development work, I used to refer to myself as conduit. And I think to this day, I'm still conduit,
Yeah.
because that's what I do, is just match things together in terms of people and missions. So from that, I went on and I worked in healthcare. I ended up with 2 hospitals. So the friend school job, I actually phased myself out of work from that, because we were able to pay the teachers for the rest of the year, but I helped write the plan for how we were going to have the school go forward. And that included eliminating every administrator except the head of the school. And so I gave my job up during that time. Went on to the 2 inner city hospitals for the Mercy healthcare system in Detroit. And again, meeting the needs of those who were in need. And the more that I spent time meeting human needs and getting into that, what I often refer to now as that sacred space of somebody's philanthropy, because it's really theirs. It's not ours. It's not the organization's. It's an individual's sacred space that you're entering, because they worked hard for what they have, and they are able to then share that with where their passions are. And so that's what took me to continue down the road. From there, I went and did my first capital campaign at another school, then got recruited down to Florida, where I spent 30 years. Started out with a school, but then took an opportunity to start a national foundation from scratch for SCORE that provides the small business counseling around the country. A lot of people have used them. They serve about 500,000 small business owners a year, but they didn't have a foundation. And I got invited to be the first person to come in and put the foundation together. And so I started that up and stayed with them for 9 years. And we went from 37,000 the first year to 3.2 million by the time that I left, that we were raising annually. And again, these were all like opportunities for me to see how people's dreams can come true for themselves. And in doing so, the dreams and the mission of the organization come true. So it was really, I had some great mentors along the way who helped me see that it really starts out with the donors first. Doesn't start out with the organization. And anybody who, starts talking and says, well, we need this and we need that, is really on the wrong end of that, spectrum in terms of where they're starting with it. And so then just continued on and with SCORE, left the 501c3s for about 6 years to go to a nonprofit that was a C6. And the difference is, in a C6, they're like a trade association, professional associations, can't accept donations. Did that for 6 years and realized I was truly missing the mission part of it. And so I told them that, I said, I've done what you've asked me to do. I did 2 strategic plans. We rebranded, changed things, but I need to get back to working on a mission somewhere. And so I did. So went to Western Sports Foundation, and that was COVID. And here comes the sort of second shoe drop of the story. I got there in July of 19. Yeah, July of 19. And March of 20 is when COVID broke out. The organization was a 100% events-based organization. And so, as you can tell, we had to stop doing everything, but we still had athletes that we were taking care of and serving. In some cases, we were providing their income also, because if they were disabled and injured from bull riding, they couldn't work anymore. And so we had a program that was providing income for them. And we needed to continue that on, because we're telling, you were talking about your allergies or things like that. That's going to go away hopefully in a day or so. These people were, guys with, 5 different plates in their faces, or their, broken arms and things like that. Anyway, and so we were faced with looking at our staff, which was 3 of us. We had already let go 1 person because of the COVID cutting our funding back. We were still raising some money from individuals in the process, but I knew that long term we weren't going to be able to support two people in the process. The other person happened to be our program officer who delivered all the programs to these athletes that were injured and who lived in Colorado where the headquarters was. I was still in Florida. So about August of 20, I went to the chairman of the board and I said, Mike, and he was a big partner at Ernst & Young. And he said, what, Mark? And I said, we need to come up with a plan for how we're going to go forward or this organization is going to go out of business. He says, well, do you have a plan in mind? I says, definitely have a plan in mind. I says, we're going to eliminate my job and we're going to keep Aubrey, who is our program officer, so she can keep delivering programs. We've got enough money to pay for her and the programs, and that should get us over the hump. And COVID, will hopefully start subsiding. We can get back to raising some additional money besides what the program that I've put in place for the next 6 months. He said, wait a minute, let me understand this correctly. You're going to give up your job and walk away from it, and this way we'll just have the one person. I says, well, Mike, either I give up my job or we close up shop, because that's what's going to happen. And I'm happy to report today that the Western Sports Foundation is going strong and still serving tons of athletes out west who are in Western sports. And Aubrey continued on with that and delivered those programs. And then just moved through, where did I go after Western Sports Foundation? Oh, moved into what currently I've been doing now. I'm in my 6th year of it, senior living, where I'm working with people aged 60 plus, all the way into the hundreds. We've got, I think, a dozen centenarians here at Mosaic Senior Life in Connecticut that we're going to be celebrating in a couple of weeks, their 100 years of life. But it's almost like a capstone for me in terms of seeing and hearing from people who've lived a full life of their own philanthropy and their own trials and their own volunteerism, and being able to see how we can continue to let them live those dreams for themselves by somebody else's philanthropy now. And so really, when you talk about transactional to transformational, when I started out in this business, I was real transactional. It was all about, I was trained, go out, make the ask, get the gift, we're counting the numbers, to today where it's like, I got to talk to one of our people who had just made their first gift to the organization. So I had called to thank them for their gift. And they were telling me that it's not just his mother who's here right now in our rehab facility, but his dad had lived here and had passed away here. And we didn't have these other things in our record, but his grandpa had been here. His Uncle Stanley had been here. He had aunts that had been here. So the entire family has been part of us for a long period of time. And they were just a grateful family to us. But it was great to hear their story of their involvement with our organization and how we were able to help them along the way. So that's sort of, how I got that. That's a long-winded answer to about, how I got into all of this and got myself wrapped up into it.
I love when people have the opportunity of really walking us step by step on each season of their life and how they continue to evolve and learn and empower themselves to be able to get to where they are today. And we didn't just understand your career path, we also understood your philosophies on fundraising and philanthropy and the various changes and sacrifices you even had to make over your career so that you could be able to not only advance yourself, but also ensure that organizations were still going to be alive at the end of the day as well. Over your 4 decades, roughly, of this work, what would you say is one of the key mindsets or the key tools or the key strategies that you believe the next generation of fundraisers or philanthropists should embody and should understand as they approach doing this work at a high level?
I think what strikes me the most, or what I feel I've picked up and have embodied for myself that would serve the next generation coming into this, and even the people who've started into this, is to remember that, one, it's not about you, and two, that it's really donor centric. And people often say to me, well, it can't just be about the donor, the organization has to be part of that. And I said, I didn't say donor primacy. I didn't say that the donor is always the top piece to this, in terms of that they're the only thing that we have to focus on. They're part of an equation of shared values. And if you can, I think, as a young fundraiser coming into this and doing the work, remember that it's about that relationship that you're building, because it's all about relationships. And if you can remember that, and remember that you're just trying to find where those shared values are, you're just trying to be that conduit. So it's not about you. The donor, and take any of your own experiences of where you give any of your voluntary contributions are. There is something there that is drawing you, that is pulling you from internally within yourself. And so you'd find it no matter what. You don't necessarily need us to do that. We just become a great facilitator and an added booster to help you get and find that place a lot sooner. There have been people along the way that, and I've said this to younger fundraisers, there have been people along the way who have said, maybe this isn't the right place for you in terms of, what you're trying to accomplish. It's interesting when you turn down your first gift. And people say, you turned down a gift? Yeah, I turned down a gift. It didn't work between both parties in the process. So that's where I'll go back to that first phrase. It's not about you. And if people could just remember that, then they remember where to put the focus. And even if they put the focus too heavily on the organization, or they put it too heavily on the donor, at least they're putting it in the right places and not themselves.
Mark, I'm looking at your background and hearing you speak. You've been in education, right? You've been connected to sports. You've done all of these different things. What I'm really interested in, and I think a lot of our viewers might be too, who work in the field, aging life care facilities, right? A lot of them are nonprofits, but that is not somewhere that I hear speakers in philanthropy coming from, that I meet fundraisers who are working at those institutions, those entities, those organizations. I'm curious, can you give us maybe just 2 or 3 tidbits about what it's like working at that kind of facility, that nonprofit, and if it differs from the work that you've done previously? Because again, I'm thinking to myself, I don't meet a lot of fundraisers, but I see those jobs open, and I'm curious, is there a longer lifespan for people working there? They stay there longer than traditional philanthropy? What does that outlook look like?
I think, when you look at this sector of the nonprofit world, I think it's safe to say that it's probably, and as you're correct, I've seen a lot of different places in terms of the types of sectors and verticals that exist. It's not the sexiest. When you talk about the fact, and I don't mind usually being candid, because it is part of life. People die here, and it, the thought that you may come to work and somebody you've been, working with as a resident, passes away overnight while you're gone. And that could happen, like in our case, whether it was here or whether when I was at John Knox Village down in Florida, 60 to 80 times a year. That's, a lot. I can remember one time when I was in John Knox that we had 5 in a week. And, so that takes a lot out of people. It's also not the type of fundraising where you always have sort of the whole array of fundraising with it. There are some organizations that live and die by their events. So some places have some events, some have no events. When I was in Florida, that organization we didn't have any events for that. Up here, we've got a women's auxiliary and a men's club, and do 4 or 5 different events per year within that. And some people, as a fundraiser, like that particular aspect of it. Some you have, strong annual giving programs. I would say that for the majority of times, what you're going to see in a senior living place is, a pretty strong annual program, a lot of planned giving, and the third thing, you'll do maybe a campaign here and there for capital purposes, for building or something like that. And so if those are not areas as a fundraiser that you find, exciting from a quote unquote fundraising standpoint, that's one thing. If you understand it more from the standpoint of it being about relationship building, I guarantee you that anybody who spends enough time in any senior living facility will come to understand quickly how enriching and invigorating it is to be around people who are, in their senior years with it. And you get a whole mixture of people, and every place is slightly different. Some places go from independent living all the way up through hospice. Some just are assisted living and long-term care. So, there's a variety of different things, but I think many people in this profession often shy away from it, from the standpoint that, again, it's not the sexiest, most glamorous thing. It's, you're not running $1 billion campaign at a university.
Mark, do you feel like there is strong connection between grateful patient giving and your work in senior care?
I think there's strong connection between grateful patient and family within it, because many times you're in a situation where it's really not the resident or the patient, unless it's down in independent living where they're still making a lot of their own decisions. When you've got folks in rehab, when you've got folks in long-term care, they're not necessarily in a prime position to be having the kind of relationships about their philanthropy within there. So you're really dealing many times with the families of these residents or the clients, whatever term is being used by an organization.
Yeah. Do you get the feeling, are there conferences, are there organizations for?
There is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tell me, I'm really curious. Tell me about that.
So there's one of the organizations that covers most of the nonprofit senior living programs is called Leading Age. And they put on their national association with state chapters. So state associations of the sub chapters of them. And so at their national conference, there's always a track that deals with development and fundraising within there. I actually sat on Marks and Lundy is one of the major nonprofit consulting firms in the country. And for 2-3 years, they did a study on philanthropic giving in senior living facilities in conjunction and collaboration with Leading Age. And I was on the editorial board for 2 of the years for that. So that was pretty exciting. Here at Mosaic is a Jewish tradition-based organization, and the Jewish organizations also have a national association called AJAS, AJAS, and they have a national conference and provide all kinds of resources and materials throughout the year to its members within there. And then there's AFP, all the standard ones within there. So there's no shortage of professional development for people if they really want to find it and have it, they can get it.
Cool.
One of the things that you said earlier, Mark, and even in our initial conversations that we had, is essentially developing that relationship with a donor at the beginning. And you talked a lot about, it's about the donor. It's not necessarily about the organization or about myself. What are your go-to questions? Like, what are some of your go-to questions that unlock what a donor actually cares about, so that you can begin setting the foundation to building that relationship on the front end?
Well, one of the first, when I think of some of the first questions that I usually use in a conversation, particularly with when I don't know them at all, is, tell me a little bit about your life story, and, what have been the most exciting things that have happened to you within there. And you get across the board a variety, which you might expect. I mean, you guys do plenty of interviewing with people, so you get to learn the background from people, and from that, what I try to do is, as I'm, listening intently to them, is what lights them up, when they're talking. What are those nonverbal communications that you start seeing, the smiles, the twinkle in the eye when they talk about something, what makes you most proud of what you personally have been accomplished? What's been the most important thing that you've been involved in from a volunteer basis? Are you aware of my particular organization? And if so, do you have any connection to it? What have you heard about it, good and bad? Tell me both sides of that. How do you feel about your own philanthropy in the community? Are there certain causes that you feel strongly about and want to support? Have you served on a board? So I really try to keep the focus on them about what it is that energizes and excites them, because I think that's what really the emotion is that we feel when we feel philanthropy. It's something that moves us internally. And I think when we're moved internally, we want to share that with somebody. Nobody does something that's like really great unless, you're a very humble person, and there are plenty of those. Most people like to talk about the good things that they're doing, are involved in or doing. They might not say, I put my name on a building, but they might say, you should see that university. It's a really great place, and you should see what they do for their kids there.
I do agree with that. That's very interesting. And I think for those new fundraisers out there, how do you go from that conversation to asking for your gift? I think that's one of the conversations that we get a lot in our Growth Alliance community is, I'm built this relationship. I understand that person. We really have a great rapport. When do you make that transition from, we've been having these conversations, we've been having these follow-ups, to transitioning it into more of a financial conversation?
Yeah. So I've in more than one case of my career have had to teach my bosses about the time that it takes to do this. Because the question usually becomes, so you've already seen this person 3 times. You haven't asked them for anything yet. You're right. I haven't, because the time's not right. And well, how do you know when the time's right? Because they'll tell us when the time is right. And what I mean by that is that you're going to learn a number of things from them about what's exciting them. And as you continue to feel the trust that you're building with them, because trust is an important part of this, unless you want them to feel like an ATM machine. So if you don't want them to feel like that, you need to make sure that your gut instinct tells you that they trust you. And then once you feel that trust, then you can look at the same time, hopefully you've been studying what your own organizational needs are and where that might fit, and then have 2 or 3 different options to talk to them about and say, here's some of the programs that we're doing within there, and here's some of the challenges that we might be facing. We might have a shortage of resources to run an extra after school care program for people. or for kids. And so we're trying to figure out different ways to solve that problem. So you're really bringing them on board to help you solve the problem, not just to give you the money, because they'll see through that instantaneously. People say, no, that's not true. I said, yes, it's true. I said, for fundraisers, whether you're a young fundraiser or whether you're an old guy like me, anybody can get the first gift. That's not the point. You want somebody who's going to stay around for multiple years with you. And so in order to do that, you have to make sure that the first time you're asking, you're doing it the right way the first time, because you don't get to do a repeat or a redo on it.
That's so good, Mark. I'm interested in putting you on the spot here. Could you tell us, and anybody listening, get ready to write this down, because I feel like Mark is going to give us literally the exact script that you need to use moving forward. Could you tell us, if you're in that conversation, how do you ask the right way? What is the language? What are you communicating to them specifically, so that you can position that ask the right way?
So if you know, let's take, for example, I was in a situation where we were doing a capital campaign for a school. We were meeting with what we knew would be our largest donor ever. The chair had a relationship, the head of school had a relationship, I had a relationship. We had been talking to them for 9 months. Got to the point where we knew in that campaign that we had to build a new gymnasium, because it was a campus with no buildings. We had the land, but we had no buildings on it. But we also understood the donor, what their interests were, what their passions were, in addition to the fact that they had 2 daughters in the school. And so we got to the conversation. We're sitting in their living room. And we had agreed in advance that the chairman of the board was the one who was going to talk about the dollar amounts that were necessary to put up the gymnasium, which we finally had settled on would be of greatest interest and greatest love to them, because his 2 daughters were very athletic, and he was also an athlete himself. So we got to that point, and the chairman of the board, the conversation's going on. We're about a half hour into this, and he hasn't asked. He hasn't said a word in terms of describing what the need is. So I look over at the head of school, and she's just nodding her head at me like, you're going to have to do this. And so I just started talking again about what the project was and the magnitude of the project, that it was a gymnasium. It was not an inexpensive project. And I said, we're hoping that there's a donor that will come along that would be willing to accept our invitation to contribute $250,000 a year for 4 years to help us, build the new gymnasium for $1 million. And then I stopped, which is pretty much what I had learned at that point, is once you put the number out there, then just stop and just wait. And so there was a little bit of silence. This has never happened to me before I got to that point. It's never happened to me in my career after that point. He turned to his wife, and they looked at each other, and he turned back to me and he said, "We'd be happy to do it." So, in terms of asking for, the ask is really about, you've done 90% of the work by the time you get there. So it shouldn't even be an ask. It should just be part of the regular conversation, so that, you've described this project that you're presenting enough and so many times that the only information that's left that you may not have talked about is how much this really costs to accomplish. And it's not saying, will you do the whole thing? Because maybe they won't do the whole thing. Never assume what it is that they'll do, and to what extent or what terms it needs to be on or anything, because that's their decision. I've had a boss who's asked me, well, how do you know how much to ask for? I said, I don't. They're going to tell us how much they're going to give. And that's really what the bottom line is to it, is going back, with them as the donor centricity of being the ones who provide you with that information. So don't be afraid to talk about money, but it's not the first thing that you talk about. So by the time you get to talk about it, it should be a natural part of your conversation.
Definitely. And easy flow into it. Mark, I noticed on your LinkedIn, and I want to bring this up because we've been talking about boards in our Growth Alliance. We've been working with our members and kind of asking them if they, what do their boards look like, who's on them, what are those board members doing to help you, how have you interacted with them? And I'd really love your take, because I see on your LinkedIn that you've been part of / you are part of boards. You are a board member, and I would love your take, being a nonprofit professional and executive. I'd love to know first, why are you joining boards, right? I'd love your insight in your mind of like, what can you, obviously besides fundraising and the understanding in general, like what is calling you to join boards? But then also, can you share maybe a few tips about what makes a successful board from the boards that you've been, like, receiving insight from the boards you've been on and the boards that you've seen?
Sure. So why I do it is an easy answer for me. I feel a responsibility to give back. And one of the ways that I feel I can give back, I can give back doing fundraising all the time. I can give back, working in this profession in the field all the time. Being on boards, I think, is a privilege because you're really leading an organization at a different level and from a different perspective. You're at the 75,000 foot level, helping to provide, the strategy, fundraising where necessary, but, because that's part of what nonprofit boards do also. But it's really, how do you help propel and grow an organization? And if it's struggling and in trouble, what experience and background can I bring to the table that will help them work through, particular problems within that. I've been on everything from the Office Depot Foundation board all the way down to my local St. Vincent de Paul board at my local church when I was living in Sarasota, Florida. And so I've seen it at all levels. But the funny thing is having been both part of boards as well as worked for boards as heads of being the head of an organization, the problems are a lot the same. You have basically well-intentioned people who are volunteering their time, who sometimes just don't either have the training or they're just, as Jim Collins says in his book, Good to Great, you've got the wrong people in the wrong seats on the wrong bus. And it's a matter of getting the right people, in the right seats with that. And so being on a board allows you the opportunity to influence those kinds of decisions. The board legally has the ultimate fiduciary responsibility for an organization. It's not owned by anybody. The board represents the public. And so, I don't think boards often spend enough time reminding themselves of the fact that they are guardians of the public trust. And so in order to make sure that that trust continues to be gained and held in high esteem, they need to be doing the right things and making sure that the right decisions are made. And sometimes they're not the easiest decisions. I've seen boards where, they've had to fire the CEO or the head of the organization. I've seen the same thing happen in terms of boards, doing the right thing of saying, well, we're going to take a chance and, we're going to take a loan and invest into this particular program, and it's paid off within there. So they get to make such a variety of decisions that makes it exciting work if you want it to be. Some people do it for the mere sake of wanting to, put it on their resume, put it on their LinkedIn profile,
Yeah.
within there with no intent of, really caring about the type of organization that they're with.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part sometimes that you see. But I think for the most part, I would encourage any fundraiser to get involved at some level on some board, because you get to see the workings of the organization from a completely different perspective, and it takes you out of your day-to-day staff role, and puts you in a seat where you're making decisions about somebody else who might be sitting in your position, and you might begin to not only look at it differently, but you may be able to carry some new lessons back to your own shop to do things differently too.
It's great insight. Thank you.
Mark, how would you go about building a board? I'm a new executive director, or maybe not a new one, maybe 3 to 5 years I've been running this thing, and I have a board based upon proximity or just people that I trust that are close to me. But that board isn't active, and that board isn't probably the best fit for where we're driving the organization. How would you assess that current organization so that we can understand who are the types of board members and what do we do to be able to recruit those people to help contribute towards pushing our mission forward?
So I won't get highly technical here. You've probably heard about it, but there's basically a gap analysis that you can do I would highly encourage any executive director to do, whether they're planning to change it or not. Because one of my other big pet peeves is places, organizations that don't have succession planning in place. And that includes the board, not just succession planning for its CEO, but also for its executive management team within there too. But the board definitely needs to have it. And I think being able to look at where those gaps are and begin identifying how you're going to fill those gaps within there. It's a little bit like, and I'm not a chess player, but I've watched enough people play chess. It's sort of like a game of chess where nothing happens in a single move. So it might take you 3 moves to get yourself a chair of the board that really understands and can really make the changes in the organization. But that's what you have to, do in that process, is go through that analysis, figure out what you need, and then working together with who you can identify as your really good people on the board in terms of those who are forward thinking and, can be creative and think out of the box and, know people, take those people, bring them together with yourself, and start to map out how you get there. So like I said, if it takes you 3 to 5 years to make those changes, you've done the organization, a big service by being able to move the board in that direction.
And I have another question for you, and this is a question that we've been getting a lot lately. If I'm running a fundraising campaign for the first time, and I want to raise, let's keep it a small number, $100,000 for my organization, where would you start? Who do you need, and how would you execute within a few months?
I would start by looking at my annual campaign or my annual giving list of donors within there. Identify who the at least top tier. So when I say top tier is, I'm looking at the top 10% of the annual giving folks, and then moving down to the mid-level within there, and starting to map out, what do I have there? Because fundraising, whether it's a campaign or not a campaign, is still, in my mind, concentric circles. Those closest to you are going to give you the most. And so, your annual campaign is a good indicator of it. People say, well, we run this gala that, gives us $500,000. Well, those are usually one-time gifts. Sometimes they're repeat gifts. That would be the other part that I would look at in terms of not only who those people are, but the frequency of giving. People who've got repetition of 4 to 7, 8 years are probably good candidates to be having those partnerships and discussions, because they wouldn't keep giving to you if in fact there wasn't something that was drawing them to you. And so while you may have a $20,000 donor in that list of the annual campaign from 2 years ago, and they've never given another gift, they may have the capacity to do it. But my first question would be is, why did they stop giving to you? And so the more you can look at sort of repetition and frequency of gifts among those large gifts. Because again, for any of these large campaigns, particularly capital campaigns, nowadays 90% of the money is coming from 10% of the people. So rather than you spend all of your time on the 90% that aren't going to be, the major part of the money that's coming in, you need to focus your time, particularly if you're in a small shop. That's where I have seen most of the issues occur is people who are in small shops. When I say small shops, 1 or 2 people in the development office. They don't know where to spend their time first. And so I always use the 90-10 or the 80-20 rule and say, focus on those 20%, put in place a good solid annual program. But if you have capital money that needs to be raised, or some kind of large campaign for a program or some other aspect, focus on the 10 or the 20%, because that's where it's going to be.
Mark, this has been a masterclass. It really has. And I guess, my question for you, and this is a selfish question, do you have capacity in your schedule to be on any boards? Because I feel like when we launch this episode, I'm sure going to be a nonprofit leader out there, or someone that is building something that would love for you to be a part of what they're doing. Do you have capacity to be on a board, or what is your time and your capacity look like these days?
So I'm on 3 advisory boards. Fortunately, they're all require very little in terms of the amount of time. With that, if it were the kind of board where I needed to spend 5 to 10 hours a month, I couldn't do it. But I can much easier if it's a couple hours, 2 to 4 hours a month or something like that. I will tell you, I've been doing some podcasts and other podcasts and webinars that are global, and I've had some people who've been emailing me or messaging me through LinkedIn saying, could you help me run this organization? And where are you located? Uganda. And no, I can't. We're 13 hours difference. The time zone factor alone is going to kill it.
No, I definitely understand that. But look, Mark, you've been amazing. And we always like to just share our gratitude, our appreciation. Since the first time that we had a chance to connect, you just are first a breath of fresh air, and you leading with heart, you starting with heart, you being a person of integrity, and you leading this work in the right way. And we appreciate you so much for sharing your story, your insights, where you're seeing fundraising and philanthropy in the future as well, but then also sharing a lot of the knowledge that you've learned over the years and in your experience. Where can we find you? How can we support you? And what are some initiatives that you're working on now that we can get behind?
All right. So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest spot to find me. And I don't remember, I have to go back and look because it's been more a labor of love, but I have 2 books that I wrote in the last 9 months. One's called Beyond the Ask. The other one's called Beyond the Culture, which was the sequel. Those are available on Amazon with Kindle and that. And then I'm humbled by the opportunity that was presented to me to have an article that'll come out next month in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And so that's going to be in the spring edition. So that'll be there. But if you can reach me on LinkedIn, that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. And I get back to anybody who direct messages me there. If I can help, I help. If I can't, I can't. Nothing, people said, well, can we utilize any of this material? I said, yeah, well, do we have to buy the book? I said, if you can't afford the book, no. I said, there's a Kindle version for free. I said, but if you need a galley copy, I said, my goal is to spread the word about becoming a transformational philanthropic society, and to get away from this transactional stuff. I've been following people like Jim Langley and TJ McGovern and Jason Lewis, people who have shown me that this is so important. And I think anything we can do to continue to get people to get their organizations to convert more towards transformation and get away from the sales tactic fundraising business would just make my heart sing.
Mark, we appreciate you. And anybody listening right now, we want you to go find Mark on LinkedIn and send him a thank you. Write him a recommendation and connect with him. Buy 20 copies of his book, each individual person that does it, because the work, the word, as he put it, and the information that he has shared today is just so valuable, and it's necessary as we're continuing to lead this work so that we can advance impact within our communities. But one of the questions that we always ask at the end of our episodes is, what type of culture are you spreading? The energy you bring is the culture you create. Go make yours worth catching.